a policy choice. You hear people say this all the time, but what exactly does it mean? Well, what it means at the core is that anywhere a government or a country has decided to try to tackle poverty and reduce poverty, yeah, they've been able to do it all through policy choices. Which is pretty shocking when you think about it, because that means that if you're poor, it's because your government didn't care enough to implement policy changes to make you not poor. It means that your government could choose to change it at any moment, and they just decide not to. And I think that's something we should all be a lot more upset about, personally, yeah. See, the thing about pointing this out is all of a sudden those ideas about like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, they just start to fall apart. We see them for the bullshit that they are. Because if poverty was really just the result of some people being lazy, then these changes that countries and governments make to try to lift people out of poverty wouldn't have any results, right? The people would still be lazy, so they would still be poor, right? But that's not what happens when countries decide to try to tackle poverty. And we actually have 4 examples of countries that over the past 10 years or so have managed to eliminate extreme poverty altogether. Now, the first country that's managed to eradicate extreme poverty is Vietnam. They actually started their efforts in the 1990s. In 1992, Ho Chi Minh City decided to increase public expenses to improve access for poor people to get things like housing and food. And with this work, they implemented other measures too. And what ended up happening is that from 1993 to 2014, Vietnam lifted 40 million people out of poverty. It's funny that this source is the IMF, because the IMF's whole thing is don't do public spending, you just want to do a free market economy. But when countries are like, no, we're not doing that, and they actually implement social spending, and it manages to do things like lift people out of poverty, reduce the poverty rate in a country from 60% to 14%, now the IMF wants to take credit for it. Interesting, IMF. The next country that was able to eradicate extreme poverty was Moldova. And one of the main ways they did this? By social assistance, just like Vietnam, social spending. Take that, IMF austerity programs. See, in 2009, there was an Ajutor social program introduced that just provided social benefit payments to the poorest. That's like UBI. That's like money. The poorest people in the country received over 2/3 of the total payment transfers. From 1999 to 2014, Moldova went from having an extreme poverty rate up in the 30s, like something like 36%, to basically 0. Yeah. Next up is the Kyrgyz Republic, who managed to eliminate extreme poverty by focusing on inequality. See, there's this thing called the Gini Index, which kind of ranks inequality within a nation, right? They ended up implementing some social safety nets, right, to transfer money to try to tackle that inequality. So the social assistance program is centered on providing support to groups identified as needy or vulnerable, including low-income families with children, the elderly, the disabled, families living in high-altitude or remote areas. So that's just a fancy way of saying, yes, again, government spending. And last, the country that has made the biggest reductions in extreme poverty worldwide, China. China lifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty. That contributes to close to 3/4 of the total reduction in poverty in the world in recent history. And if you think, oh, that's Chinese propaganda, this is the World Bank's website, okay? And if you know anything about the World Bank, they're not exactly commie-loving good time over there, no. But even the World Bank Vice President for East Asia and the Pacific said that China's poverty reduction is a story of sustained growth through economic transformation. And that economic transformation did a couple things. Mostly, though, it just raised the income of the poor and tried to tackle rural poverty. So in China, they realized that the first step to tackling poverty is to accurately count poverty. So they started putting together these task force of people to go out to rural areas and really assess and address the poverty issues there. By 2014, authorities had identified nearly 90 million poor people, 30 poor families in China. So the annual government budget to help alleviate poverty ended up doubling to help support these people. Chinese leaders also pledged to eliminate the 2 worries, inadequate food and inadequate clothing, and provide 3 guarantees: access to healthcare, education, and housing. Did you notice the common thread between how all of these countries tackled issues of extreme poverty? Yeah, it was through government spending and social spending programs, and literally just through giving poor people access to resources and money. So remember, if you're poor, it's because your government has decided it wants you that way. And it would rather spend money fighting secret wars and propping up dictators around the globe with our tax dollars, right, than just helping people have access to the basic things they need, like food and shelter and healthcare. At any time, we could change this if we wanted to, but the people in power, They just don't wanna. They just don't wanna. No big deal. Okay, yeah, poverty is a policy choice.